Hello, friends, and welcome to Spring at St. Andrew. It is my privilege to welcome you here today from the beautiful St. Andrew Sanctuary. I am grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. St. Andrew is proud to be an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome here and you belong here. If you have any questions about our church, prayer requests for our care team, or if you would like to get in touch with a member of our pastoral team or staff, please email info@gosaintandrew.com. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the St. Andrew community through our many classes, group life gatherings, and service opportunities, you can email us directly at connect@gosaintandrew.com. We would love to hear from you. Just as a reminder, our full Sunday morning worship services, complete with music, prayer, announcements, liturgy, ministry spotlights, and the sermon, are live streamed on our YouTube page each week and permanently archived for viewing anytime. Lastly, to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can always visit gosaintandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. And now let's listen together to this week's scripture and sermon.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome bought spices, so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Easter Sunday, it's every pastor's dream. It really is the big one. People always ask me every year, is Easter like Super Bowl Sunday for you? And I say, no, it's way better than that. It's like a Taylor Swift concert. That's how great Easter Sunday really is. The sun is shining, the sanctuary is humming, the music is soaring, all the kids are sugar buzzing on yellow peeps and jelly bellies, and the Easter story is so inspiring. Life prevails, love wins, Christ is alive, so we can go on, and we must go on, despite whatever bleak stuff life throws at us, because the powers of death will not have the last word. On Easter Sunday, our faith is so brave and so emboldened and so buoyant. But we easily forget that the very first Easter wasn't exactly a hopeful and victorious Cadbury cream, honey-baked ham kind of day. For the earliest followers of Jesus, the first Easter began in hopelessness and despair, with deep sadness over the inexplicable human loss of their innocent rabbi named Jesus, who had not only died unexpectedly, but had been executed unjustly by the most violent, inhumane means imaginable: public crucifixion on a cross. Their rabbi was dead, and if his death alone wasn't tragic and painful enough, it was that his divine dream, the dream that had so captured their hearts and minds, seemed to have died along with him. For them, it was this divine dream that Jesus preached for 3 years that made him so very special. It's why they left everything to follow him. Jesus wasn't like all the other rabbis of his day. He didn't seem to care much about religion. He never once really taught that we should become more religious like all the other teachers did. Instead, Jesus was captured by this extraordinary dream for the world. And he lived for that dream, and he died for that dream. And it turned out to be a dream that only a small minority of the people of his day chose to believe in. And one that, even today, seems so impractical, unreasonable, and improbable that few people believe in it now. What was this divine dream? As Jesus looked at his world and watched Roman soldiers and Jewish protesters clash every day, as he witnessed his own people living under occupation, suffering from injustice and fueled by hatred and hostility, as he observed how tense and tired and testy everyone had become, like so many people have become today, Jesus believed there was a divine purpose to this world, that despite the evidence, it really was headed somewhere good. The world might look like an aimless, random mess right now, but Jesus believed it would be redeemed. And so he dared to dream out loud that someday love would overcome hate, goodness would triumph over evil, and kindness would defeat cruelty, and humbleness would overthrow pride, and mercy would turn strangers into friends, and forgiveness would transform enemies into brothers, and everything lost and broken in the world would be found and restored, until the world would finally look like the good and beautiful thing that God had always hoped it would be. That was Jesus' dream. And his earliest disciples believed in it. They longed for a better world. So they left everything to follow this dreamer in pursuit of his dream. And they believed that by pursuing that dream, by living it out, they could actually change the world. But then the dreamer was crucified and buried. And they assumed that along with the dreamer, the dream had died and was buried too. But it turned out they were wrong. On Easter, the dreamer rose from his tomb and his dream rose with him. Do you believe in that dream? Have you ever thought that the universe might actually be headed somewhere good? That time and history in your life and all of this, that it's not just random and aimless after all, but that it might all be headed somewhere good. And that there might be a divine power calling all of this toward that goodness. Well, Jesus did. His followers did. What about you? The 19th century abolitionist minister Theodore Parker, he once captured the nature of this divine dream, this cosmic purpose, when he spoke of the moral arc of the universe. And Parker said it's difficult to see sometimes because the world can be so bleak and harsh. But he said this moral arc of the universe, quote, bends toward justice. A half century later, Martin Luther King Jr. paraphrased Theodore Parker, saying famously, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." You may be wondering what any of this has to do with Easter, but it's so tempting for Christians to simply spiritualize Easter, to turn it into a lesson about immortality of the soul and resurrection of the body and the promise of everlasting life. Did you know it actually wasn't until around the 2nd century that Christians made Easter primarily about these things? For the first 100 years or so, Easter was something more like a wake-up call for Christians, a reminder that the divine dream wasn't finished, that there was still work to do, still some bending to be done on the moral arc of the universe. Anastasis is the Greek word for resurrection. It means to rise up, to rise again, to stand up again. It speaks of Jesus' rising to life, but it also speaks of the rising up of those earliest followers. Those followers who, after the death of the dreamer, almost gave up on the dream. The root of anastasis is, of course, stasis, from which we get the word static, and static means inertia, stagnation, stuckness. And that was the condition of those disciples, stuck. The world had knocked them down, and Easter was a call to get back up on their feet. The world had slowed them down, and Easter was a call to get moving again, to get off their donkeys and back on their feet, to get moving again in pursuit of that divine dream that didn't die on Good Friday after all. Maybe you're like those earliest followers of Jesus, and you look at the world and sometimes it doesn't make much sense, and sometimes it seems just senseless. And sometimes it's hard to believe that there really is a divine dream for this world, or a moral arc of the universe that's bending towards something good, or even that there is a God who's calling and bending it toward that goodness. And maybe you wonder instead if all of this is just random and aimless. Or maybe you do really believe in that divine dream. And maybe you do believe that all of this is really headed somewhere, but you look at the world and the shape of the world as it is right now, and you just can't see it. And you're stuck. And you're weary. And you're discouraged. Because there is so much resistance to that dream. If that describes you, then you're not alone. And the story of the first Easter is a story for you. Because that's how those early followers felt that first Easter morning. The dreamer was dead, and his divine dream was buried, and they were hopeless and stuck. On Easter morning, they woke up to a Good Friday world, a world of war and tanks and tear gas, and that hopeless feeling that it would never, ever get any better. So some of them go to the tomb of the dreamer to just cry it out, to just get used to it, to just get on with life, and to just try to do the best they could for as long as they could with whatever time they had left in a world that seemed so aimless and random and cruel. But then they find an empty tomb, and the dreamer is missing. And they hear spoken from a stranger the most hopeful words spoken on that first Easter and every Easter since. He is not here. He's gone ahead of you. The dreamer is alive. The dreamer is alive, and the dream is still being dreamt. So get off your donkey and get on your feet and go pursue it. Just when they thought they couldn't go on, they knew suddenly they must go on to pursue the dreamer and to work for the dream that isn't dead after all. Easter is a story for anyone who is stuck but still wants to believe that the world really is headed somewhere good, that it's not random or aimless, that the universe is bending toward goodness and justice, and that we can be a part of the bending of it if only we pursue the dream. Which means the question at Easter for us is this: will we still pursue the dream? Are we up for the chase? The writer Annie Dillard wrote about how when she was 7 years old, 6 inches of snow had fallen on her neighborhood one winter morning. She was with some neighborhood boys standing on a front yard along a well-trafficked street, making fresh snowballs and taking aim at each passing car. And a black Buick slowly made its way down the street, and the group quickly spread out. They waited for the right moment and fired away. And a soft, fresh snowball struck the driver's windshield right before the driver's face. A perfect hit. And to their surprise, the car suddenly stopped. The door opened, a man stepped out and began running toward them. He he didn't even stop to close the door. He was dressed in a suit and tie and street shoes and still ran after them. And they ran for their lives. They split up, except Dillard trailed one of the younger boys, and that man picked the two of them to follow. He chased them around houses and up backyard paths, under low trees and down steps, across driveways, through backyards, porches, over wood piles. He wouldn't give up. Block after block, he chased them silently over picket fences and through thorny hedges, around garbage cans and across streets and through backyard labyrinths of 10 blocks before he finally caught them by their jackets, and there they stood, staggering, coughing in some obscure backyard. A man in his 20s, a boy and a girl. He chewed them out. But she said that wasn't the real point. The point, she said, was that he had chased us passionately without giving up. And so he had caught us, this sainted, skinny, red-headed man who wished to have a word with us. Maybe Easter is God's snowball on the windshield of our vision. An unexpected intrusion, a startling wake-up call, a divine provocation to see if we're still up for the chase, to see just how far we'll pursue the dream. Easter is our catalyst for hope in a world where more and more people look at the world and say it's all just random and aimless and there's no meaning to any of it and nothing beyond it to hope for. The great philosopher Immanuel Kant, he once wrote about how important hope is to our action. Think for a moment about your relationships or your life goals. Well, Kant said the reason we do things or the reason we commit to someone or something is because we hope that it will end well. He said we can't rationally or logically prove hope. Instead, we can only go about our daily decisions and actions believing there is some good end or some good outcome at the end of it all. We have to hope that what we do will end well. Hope, he said, is what motivates our actions in the world. When you look at the world, what do you hope for? What are you working for? In 1952, Emil Zatopek, a Czechoslovakian runner, arrived at the 52 Olympics in Helsinki, Finland, at the ripe age of 30. Zatopek had come to compete in the 5,000 and 10,000 meter races, and to the surprise of many, he made Olympic history. In the 5,000, he came back from all the way from 4th place to win gold and set an Olympic record. He later won the 10,000 meter, again, setting an Olympic record. Zatopek had accomplished everything he went to the Olympics to do. 2 races, 2 golds, 2 world records. But on the last day of the games, Zatopek decided at the last minute to try his luck in the marathon. He'd never competed in the marathon, but the dream of winning 3 golds compelled him to at least try. His strategy was simple. He'd run alongside Jim Peters, the British world record holder. He figured if he could keep pace with Peters, maybe he'd have a chance. Well, halfway into the race, after a punishing first half pace, a group of runners fell away from the field, and now it was just Peters and Zatopek. Peters later said that up to that point, the pace had been far too fast, and he'd already overtaxed himself. But at the halfway mark, Zatopek turned to Peters and said, "Is this about the right pace, or should we be going faster?" Peters was already suffering mightily, but hoping to crack Zatopek, Peters said, "Ideally, we should be going faster." So taking Peters at his word, Zatopek picked up the pace, and Peters immediately cracked, quickly falling off the back. Zatopek won gold by a half mile, breaking the Olympic record by 6 minutes. And it came down to that one simple question under the most extreme, difficult circumstances. Is this about the right pace, or should we be going faster? What about you? In a Good Friday world, are you still pursuing the dreamer and his divine dream that does live on, bending that moral arc of the universe and acting on your greatest hopes? And is this about the right pace, or should you be going faster? The takeaways for today: the dreamer and his dream live on in us. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And may we, like Christ, never ever rest in peace, but rise up in hope.